Greetings, curious acolytes of the Force, and welcome back to the Archives. When Luke Skywalker finally was able to finish his work with the Rebellion towards the end of the Galactic Civil War, he could pursue the new path that was laid out before him, as the last real Jedi around. Luke was given the task of rebuilding the Jedi Order from the ground up, and he took this with conviction. In canon, we aren't really getting that much information regarding Luke's Jedi Academy. However, in Legends, we know that he immediately went to Yavin 4 and set up what would become known as the Jedi Praxium. During the years that he trained the next generation, Luke would do away with many rules that were once a big staple in the old Jedi way. Not only did he allow attachments and encourage marriage within the Order, but he also had no limits on the ages of the Jedi that were allowed to join. This was once a very important part of the Jedi way, that being that for thousands of years, the Jedi exclusively recruited children toddler age and under, but in Luke's Order, this was not the case. So what were Luke's thoughts about training children? We know he had quite a few criticisms of the old Jedi Order, so was this one of them? Well, my friends, it's time to open up another holocron and dive into Luke's biggest problem with the old Jedi. When beginning any organization, the second most important part behind the ideals of what the organization stands for is the members. At this point in the timeline, Luke believed that he was the last surviving Jedi. But although the galaxy was lacking in Jedi in total, it was not lacking in Force sensitives. All Luke had to do was find them. When it came down to selecting the ages of his students, Luke wasn't able to be choosy even if he had wanted to. His first 12 students were all adults, with the few of them actually being older than Luke himself. In fact, a man whose name was simply Streen was an elderly man by the time he joined the Jedi Order. He had previously been a Tabana gas miner with senses that he did not understand. Streen, though, was so in tune with Force empathy that he had a natural ability that could control the amount of input he was getting from all of the people around him. He felt everyone's emotions and ideas to the point where it was completely overwhelming. Streen would actually separate himself from all civilization because of this fact, until Luke eventually found him and promised to train him to control his senses of perception. Luke was definitely not very selective when it came to the first of his students, as he just needed as many as he could find to start the new Jedi Order and have it be taken seriously. This resulted in the new Jedi Order being made of all kinds of races, ages, and backgrounds. There was even a queen of one planet and a Night Sister from Dathomir, the latter of which would eventually set up her own Jedi Academy on Dathomir and bring her Night Sister brethren into the fold. She wasn't the only one from a background of darkness either. Fascinatingly, Cam Solsar was actually a Dark Jedi prior to meeting Luke. Though he was deeply involved with the dark side, Luke managed to recreate his greatest feat with his father and turn the Dark Jedi back to the light. After which, the former Dark Jedi became one of the founding members of the Praxium, along with the other 12. But speaking of the dark side, having trouble pass was one of the main concerns of the old Jedi. The biggest reason the Jedi of the old had continually reduced the age limit of their trainees, until the point of only accepting infants, was because of a repeated problem with Jedi who knew of a life outside of the temple, causing them to be far more volatile and not subservient to the Jedi ways. Some people came from very troubling backgrounds, and these feelings of resentment can build into darkness, especially once they get their hands on the powers of the Force. Former attachments can come back to light, or old vendettas will resurface, and one might try to use their new Jedi abilities for selfish gain. It was for this reason that the Jedi refused older students in the first place. The risk of selfish action was far too great for the Jedi Council to take a chance on. In keeping with all fairness though, we can't fault the Jedi Council for this decision, as they do have much backing for it, especially considering it was Darth Vader who would result from a Jedi being trained far past the expiration date for youngling induction. However, Luke separates himself from this issue because he believes he has found a brand new approach. Because he knew how the dark side grabbed a hold of people, he knew the kind of love that was needed to bring them back. However, that's not to say that he didn't experience the same issue by taking in older students. One of Luke's problem students went by the name of Brachus. A remnant of the Imperial Inquisitorius had actually caught wind of Luke trying to bring back the Jedi, and sought to stop him. This is because the new Grand Master was spreading bulletins around that would pay for information regarding anyone with Force abilities, Force sensitivity, or any info in general related to the Jedi. So the Inquisitors ended up sneaking a spy of theirs into the Jedi Order, a young Inquisitor by the name of Brachus. He was given the task to infiltrate and sabotage the efforts of Luke in creating the Jedi. Upon his arrival in the first class of students, Luke immediately sensed his purpose and exactly the reason for being there. However, Luke decided to do something different and played along with him doing so. working and bringing Braxis back to the light side of the Force, a venture that he was largely successful at. Braxis would even participate in bringing an end to the Sith spirit of Exar Kun. However, during one specialized training session, the Grand Master decided to give Braxis a Yoda-style self-reflection training exercise. In doing so, Braxis would come face to face with the darkness that he was still seeding within himself, and he was deeply distressed by what he saw. Instead of working with Luke to try and fix it though, he resented Luke for making him do the exercise, and he fled the academy. Eventually, he would end up turning back to the dark side, and would later be killed by Leia in a duel. While that story had a tragic ending, there was another which perfectly showcased why Luke was truly different. The story of Kip Duran is one that most likely will align the fears of the old Jedi. Kip had been kept in prison by the Empire in the spice mines of Kessel. Though he had eventually escaped and was brought under the wing of Luke, he maintained a deeply rooted hatred for the Empire. This rage was exploited by the Sith spirit of Exar Kun, who turned him to the dark side and sent him on a rampage against the Imperial remnant. Kip would steal the superweapon known as the Sun Crusher and use it to kill thousands during his personal war on what remained of the Galactic Empire. Eventually, Luke would find Kip and manage to free him from Exar Kun's influence. Afterwards, Kip showed great sorrow and regret for his actions, and eventually, Duran would become one of Luke's most talented Jedi, while also gaining a reputation of being very polarizing among the New Order. While Luke had no issues training adults and clearly felt as though he could manage anyone regardless of a dark background, how did he feel about the training of children? One of the biggest public criticisms of the Jedi was the idea that they were, in essence, training a bunch of child soldiers. However, this criticism is only valid during times of war when the Jedi were allowing Padawans to fight on the front lines. Most of the time, it was quite safe for the old Jedi Padawans. But what was Luke's opinion? As far as we know, he didn't have a problem with that either. In fact, like we mentioned earlier, he greatly encouraged the Jedi of his academy to marry and have children of their own, not minding if the Jedi were to even marry one another. Luke's entire reason for encouraging this was twofold. First, he believed that having loved ones made his Jedi stronger, believing that it gave them something to fight for. Almost all of Skywalker's Jedi were made up of adults who weren't brought up in the Jedi Temple and were not fed a steady doctrine of selfless action for the betterment of the galaxy. Because of this, the new Jedi needed something more personal to fight for, and this turned into their own families and loved ones. But the second and most important reason was Luke believed that he knew if they were to get married, that they would produce Force-sensitive offspring, more that could be inducted into the Jedi Order and the next generation of peacekeepers. Now, of course, things would be done a lot differently. They wouldn't be exclusively Jedi if they did not want to be. They could do their own jobs, have their own lives, and go about their business as they pleased. But they would still hold a duty to the Jedi first and foremost, especially if that is the life that they chose. Luke would bring up not only his own children, but also Leia and Han's in the academy once they were ready. What he did not do, however, was snatch children up in infancy and demand that they be trained. In effect, what Luke had done was go back to the ways of the Jedi and how they used to operate thousands of years ago prior to the old Sith Wars. In this age, the Jedi Temple was on Ossus, and the Order functioned much in the same way that Luke's did, which I think is pretty interesting considering Exar Kun's spirit would return right when the Jedi Order went back to the ways it did when he was alive. But anyway, my friends, this is what Luke thought about training children. Luke himself was once denied training for being too old, and he would ensure that as the next Jedi Grand Master, this would not be the case. Luke had a very practical reason for training Jedi of all ages, and wouldn't begin training children until they were born into the Jedi Academy and showed some affinity with the Force. While this unfortunately made Luke's order smaller than the first one, it made for a far more livable situation, and the quality of Jedi was much higher. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on Luke actually training some who aligned with the dark side, and some Jedi even who were much older? Do you believe that Luke had it right? Or were the old Jedi correct? As always, my friends, thank you so much for stopping by the archives today, and may the Force be with you.